it's a terrible, terrible thing what's going on with hate in our country, frankly, and all over the world. And something has to be done. This is a dispute that will always exist, I suspect. But if they had some kind of a protection inside the temple, maybe it could have been a very much different situation. The world is a violent world. And you think when you're over it, it just sort of goes away, but then it comes back in the form of a madman, a wacko. And I think they should stiffen up laws. And I think they should very much bring the death penalty into vogue. They should pay the ultimate price.
President Trump's first reaction to the shooting at the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh on his way to a campaign rally in Illinois yesterday. We're going to talk about this all on our roundtable now, joined by our chief political analyst, Matthew Dowd, national correspondent for the Washington Post, Mary Jordan, Reihan Salam, executive editor of the National Review and author of Melting Pot or Civil War, A Son of Immigrants Makes the Case Against Open Borders, former Trump Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert, and Democratic strategist, former DNC chair Donna Brazile. Matt, I said at the top of the show we shouldn't be surprised by this. All the events of this week, were they inevitable?
I think we should be surprised that something like this takes place in America in the course of the last week, but I think much of it's been predictable in this and the times we're in and where we are today. I'll quote the philosopher Yoda, which says the path to the dark side is fear. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. And I think we're at a moment in time where we have to speak compassionately, clearly, and calmly in the times we're in. And I think our leaders, and I would put specific responsibility on the president, that he has an obligation to try to rid us of much of this tribalism. And I think what he's done over the course of the last few years is help foment this. I'm not saying he's responsible for what happened in Pittsburgh. He's not responsible for what happened with the bombs that were sent. He's not responsible for what happened at the supermarket. But all of those have a commonality. A white national supremacist shot 2 blacks at a supermarket. A white national supremacist sent 17 IEDs across the country to Democratic leaders. A white nationalist supremacist just killed 11 Jewish people in a synagogue in Pittsburgh. And in the course of that, I think the president has not actually allocated resources to deal with it in the right way. And he also has not spoken in the right way in the course of this that has diminished the hate.
Tom, you had to work on domestic terror when you worked for President Trump as Homeland Security Advisor. How do you respond?
Yeah, well, I'm sad to hear it all. To be honest, even this morning, the lead into this was a focus on the president's comments as he walked out to the helicopter, instead of the focus on the quote I was hoping to see, in which he condemns anti-Semitism and violence in this country. And so it's a hard time to claim he's got a big...
But wait a second.
Big megaphone.
That was his first response. That was his instinctive response to what happened.
No,
what he then said in the speech was what was scripted for him.
I don't believe that's accurate. First off, he has control over what's scripted in those speeches.
You're saying that wasn't accurate? That was his first response?
No, because it wasn't his first response. It was on his way out, a response to a question thrown at him about gun control. So the question was already political, and the reporters in the gaggle were saying, what are your thoughts on gun control in response to this issue? His actual response to the American people was that we have no tolerance for violence in this country or anti-Semitism. To be honest, whether you play it or not or agree with me or not, that's what I want to promote today.
But, Tom, when a child has an absent parent, the other parent steps up, or the sibling steps up. Yep. But when the country is going through a lot of pain and strife, you look for the president to be that parental figure. And yesterday, I think, at that moment, he was not the parent we needed. He was not the person that could heal us, that could talk about the pain. He runs away from his responsibility as a leader. We're all leaders. We all have voices. And his voice is the loudest voice at a moment like this. A moment, George, when our leaders, our former presidents, regardless of their party, they were elected by the entire American people. Their lives were at stake, the lives of our Attorney General, the lives of members of Congress, the lives of people who are just regular people.
People in the media.
And people in the media.
Yeah, people at this table.
But when you're out talking to voters, because we're days away from a very important election, what they say is the country is in need of repair. And what they want is a repairman or a repairwoman to fix this. And I think the 2020 election is going to end up actually being on this point.
People do say that, but do they vote to back up what they say is one of my questions.
Well, it depends on we're giving them. And I think this is one of the key questions for 2020 is who are the Democrats going to give? Because right now we're still in our two camps, and right now it's about getting the vote out for this side or this side. And it's either you're with, this whole election in days to come is about Trump. Are you with him or are you against him? And we'll see about how the turnout turns.
One thing I feel compelled to say is that you had brave women and men, police officers, who intervened in Squirrel Hill. You had folks who stopped that shooter in Louisville, Kentucky. You had these people putting themselves in grave danger. These are women and men who have different political beliefs. Some of them are Republicans, some of them are Democrats, some of them support the president, others absolutely do not, yet they were able to come together to work effectively. And I think that one dynamic you see happen is that we tend to invest a lot in our politicians. We identify with them. And so the problem is that you have these distinctions getting blurred. You have people who exploit a certain climate, people who are hateful, dangerous people. This gentleman who sent bombs threatened Florida Power and Light in 2002 with an attack. You have these people who will have a pre-existing narrative. They will cook up this hatred. They will connect it to various other things. But then there are other Americans who support this or that political cause who then feel as though, wait a second, are you trying to silence me when I have a legitimate concern about this or that issue? That further deepens the political divide. That further pits us against one against another. And I think it's really important to remember, again, these public servants, these ordinary, decent people, they come in many different shapes, sizes, and colors, and political convictions. So let's keep that in mind.
That's something we learn again and again and again, but then that gets back to the question, what responsibility do political leaders have to encourage that and not its opposite?
So this is not a both sides moment. And I think anybody that actually acts like this is a both sides moment, the president has a special responsibility at times like this. I think the country out there as a whole is not as tribalized as what Washington is, doesn't view politics the same as the president does, doesn't access those levels of hate and discourse that he does. But the president has a special responsibility. I'm not Michelangelo, but I can paint by number. And when you string together the president's actions, and you string together the president's words, and you string together all those things he's done, let's not forget that what happened in Pittsburgh was because this man was radicalized because of the language of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. He was mad that refugees and immigrants were giving whatever he considered special privileges in the course of this. And let's
reference the caravan.
And let's also not forget that within this week, the president proudly claimed himself a nationalist and proudly castigates the immigrants, the struggling families, the refugees that are walking miles and miles. And as he does that, not all Americans, most Americans are good people and all that. The president, in my view, the president has to come to terms with this and come to terms with his own responsibility and where we are as a country today.
Just briefly, Matt, there's so much to agree with in what you've said, but we should not lose sight of the fact that this awful villain is someone who accused the president of being part of a Jewish conspiracy. He is someone who sees the president as a globalist who is seeking to destroy the country. This is someone who is a noxious, poisonous person who believed ideas that unfortunately did not begin with one president or another. Anti-Semitism is a pervasive, dangerous threat in nations around the world.
That is absolutely.
Let's not lose sight.
Hold on a second.
Why has it risen dramatically in the last 2 years?
Why?
And the reason why he castigated the president, this man, was because he didn't think the president hated enough. He didn't think the president was anti-immigrant enough. That's why he was mad at the president. He thought the president wasn't bashing immigrants more than he wanted.
Absolutely, and the fact that you have Jewish members of his administration who are absolutely central to his larger political project. He was deeply suspicious, and I don't think you can really attribute this man's hatefulness solely to one political party or another.
We should never do that. I mean, in 1958, a Jewish synagogue. A Jewish synagogue was.
I'm saying it's part of the problem.
I agree.
Pretty close.
I believe the leadership is lacking. But I'm a daughter of the South. This is a moment for us. I mean, my parents and grandparents had to come home and comfort us, knowing that we were at danger just because of what we look like. A Jewish synagogue was bombed in Atlanta in 1958. 4 little black girls were murdered 4 years ago. When is this hate going to stop? There's been a rise in anti-Semitism, a rise in racist, violent rhetoric in our country. I don't blame the president alone. I blame all of us. We have to tone this down, take responsibility for each other, come together, because our children, what are we going to tell our kids today?
I couldn't agree with you more, because I think one of the most dangerous things I'm hearing when I'm out there in different states is people are saying, you know, I'm more disillusioned and upset, not because of Trump. He can lie, you know, he can spin conspiracy theories. He's one guy, he's always done that. I'm more disillusioned because so many people are listening to him. He's going to leave office, and these people that had Trump signs in their yard are going to stay. The divide is dangerously wide, and when I look at my neighbors that I used to go to the store with or sit at baseball games with, now I think, you know, they're anti-me because they're listening to him. And this is why I think it's so deep and dangerous.
And the attacks on the media have worked. But the president still does have more than 2 years left in office at least.
Yeah.
So, Tom, the question to you is then, what does he do now? What does he do in this moment?
Look, you know, one of the things that troubles me about this is it just kind of furthers what everybody already thought of him. If you already thought kindly of him or gave him an open mind, you bring that to this table. And if you didn't, you don't. Fairness to both of you. I agree, though, that there's some commonality at this table. This shocks all of us. This shocks the president. I know him. You don't watch this and you're not moved, right? He's moved by the humanity of this. I went to the University of Pittsburgh. I know Squirrel Hill really well. These are good people. I'll tell you what I think. I think it's a really simplistic response to say complex problems of the First Amendment that you heard Jay Johnson talk about, problems of the Second Amendment that are enshrined in our Constitution that are hard to untangle in this world against, well, let's just blame Trump. The problem here is that Donna's right. This has been going on for a very long time, and to have a holistic conversation about stopping hate and empowering our law enforcement with tools other than guns, which, by the way, they used really admirably. I'm with you on that. I'm kind of proud, I hate to say it, of the tactical emergency response that we saw and the casualty care that we saw. It's the reality of our world as a Homeland Security advisor. We're going to have to see more of that. But I don't think the president's going to be able to sustain this level of rhetoric for a very long time. He's going to go out and make his case on the border. There's going to be a vote, and the people are going to come back and decide either.
Well, for example, he spoke last night in Illinois about you're going to be very happy because he's going to announce these new emergency actions on Tuesday to close down the border. Should the president keep the focus on the caravan in the wake of what we saw yesterday?
Look, I don't think that you can stop pointing out the facts that there's an increased problem on the border. At this point, facts, right? Just like Mr. Greenblatt espoused earlier today. It's not him trying to incite anything. He's just pointing out that there's a 57% increase.
He called it a national emergency.
It's at Mr. Greenblatt?
No, the president.
The president. At this point.
He's also made people think that they're right on the Texas border. They're 1,000 miles away.
And it's ISIS and it's fear-mongering.
I mean, it is fear-mongering. It is making people...
If you don't allow for politicians in this country to go out and try to frame the issue to move policymakers to make a change, I mean, that's what we do.
No, it's all politics. It's all about...
You know the facts.
You can't hang a murderer
Tom, you
around
know
his
the
neck.
facts as well as anybody about this.
Yeah.
And the facts are there's more of a danger in this country today from violence committed by white supremacists than radical Islam in this country today. The facts show that. There's more of a danger of violence and crime being committed by white supremacists than by people sitting in a caravan struggling to come up there. But what does the president do? We're not allocating resources to deal with all these white supremacists.
Forgive me, just to get in
We're
here.
sending 800 soldiers.
Let's let Ryan get in.
If you look at 2015, if you look at the European migrant crisis, it was a crisis in which initially you had desperate people fleeing Syria and Iraq, but then you had folks coming from Morocco, from Pakistan, from various other points, because when you have subtle shifts in enforcement policy, you can get a big cascade, you can get a very big reaction. This is a serious issue. We need to talk about it calmly, dispassionately, carefully, but there is no question that the migrant caravan is a real legitimate issue, and when you have a migrant cascade,
emergency?
Look, when you have a migrant cascade of this kind, you can actually get a big political backlash. That's what we've seen in Europe since 2015. That can be a rolling emergency, George, and that's what we need to prevent. We need to remember that all of us have an interest in border security. It's not about pitting one group against another, and it's true that President Trump hasn't always been as careful as he ought to be in talking about it, but there's no question that this is a real issue, and 10 years ago, you would have had bipartisan agreement on this, and it troubles me that now you can't talk about this in a measured, sensible way.
You know what troubles me? The president goes out and say Democrats are doing it. That George Soros. I mean, putting a target on Mr. Soros, a philanthropist. He cares about our country. Here's a man who had to flee anti-Semitism as well, his family. That's George. Let's go back to what happened in Pittsburgh. There's been a surge in violence in the Jewish community, vandalism. There's been a surge in bomb threats. There's been a surge in cemetery demarc. I mean, it's happening. We need to focus on it.
It is terrifying.
That's why we need leadership.
It is absolutely terrifying and wrong. It is the case that there are many Americans, many prominent Americans, who engage in our politics, and they become targets. This, however, is not unique to George Soros, I'm sorry to say.
But it is
this is a very
unique
dangerous
to have
climate.
a president that is so combative, and his style is attack. He boasts about, you know, I'm going to hit them, punch them 10 times harder. At a time like this, when we want to tamper things down, look, Democrats want safe borders. Why does it have to be always the attack, the combative Trump style that's raised the temperature?
At this point has grown to a point where I'm afraid there's not going to be any necessary reform. It has reached an emergency level. Let's not use rhetoric that justifies violence, but it's reached a level in which thousands of children are now sitting in DHS custody and HHS custody without their parents. They've been abandoned. We're sitting in places where we've got an increase of 75%, I think, of family units crossing the border. That's creating a problem where the laws passed in 2000 and 1965 don't match up with the realities of Central American as opposed to Mexican immigrants. We need a change. The president's calling for it. People distrust the president. We're not going to get change. That's where we are. That doesn't mean we can hang a mass murderer around his neck. So I want the rhetoric to be calm, but I don't think that the American viewers are looking at President Trump as a murderer.
We all agree.
No one at this table said that. Not one person.
What he is responsible for,
He's responsible for the rhetoric that led to the murder.
No, here's what I said, Tom,
Skip, you gotta be careful.
and I'll repeat it
absent
again.
parent.
He is responsible for fomenting and using rhetoric that causes people to feel like that is normalized. And I'm not saying he's at all responsible for any of the incidents that happened this week, at all in this. But let me go back to this. Yes, we need border security.
Absolutely.
Yes, we need solutions to the problems. Yes, we should be welcoming to immigrants in this country. Yes, we should be a country that deals compassionately with refugees in this. But we as a country are not allocating resources in this country today to the problems in a priority order. The biggest problem of violence in this country today is from white supremacists. And we are allocating basically no money to deal with that problem. But we're sending 800 soldiers to the border to deal with a problem that's not only 1,000 miles away, but there's been zero evidence that says these people are criminals.
I think you're doing a disservice to the intelligence agencies, to those working in Homeland Security who are profoundly concerned about this. I think it is absolutely the case that you have a domestic terror threat, but here's what I worry about.
Does the president ever talk about white supremacy?
One thing I'm worried about is that in the early 1970s, you had 2,500 bombings in this country. Imagine if that happened today with social media, with virality, with the tendency to match one party's rhetoric with another party's rhetoric. We're constantly egging one another on rather than looking to those first responders and how they work together across that divide.
Can I just say, in talking to real people and voters, you know, in Georgia, they just miss the America that they love. They're like, we are not these people. They just want someone to put to words, you know, an aspirational place, to talk about things like the melting pot as opposed to kind of the very combative style. I think people miss the America they know.
Well, we have about a week. We have about a week to go before the election. We'll see if we hear it over the next week.